What's up, guys? Welcome to Tech and Flow. I'm your host, Xavier Gray. Meet my co-host, Shelby Reynolds. The aim of this podcast is to explore the world of tech, discuss trends, interview successful tech entrepreneurs and software engineers. We hope you find this podcast enjoyable. Thank you for listening.
All right, guys. Welcome to the show. We are Tech and Flow. I am Shelby Reynolds, your host.
And I'm Xavier Gray.
Thanks for having us here.
Yeah. If you don't mind, could you go ahead and introduce yourself? Whoever wants to go first.
Sure. So my name is John Ohlwiler. I'm the CIO of Sentry IT Solutions, and we operate here in the Central Florida area. And we just specialize in general IT for a lot of different businesses. Our largest client is covering about 3 or 4 states and about 350 employees, all the way down to, several employees locally.
Awesome.
And I'm Tom Craig here with Advanced Systems Solutions. We're a local IT consulting company where as well we have clients from here to LA and everywhere in between.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So Xavier, you guys know him personally, right? I'm the stranger.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
and you guys,
John and I just met today.
Yeah,
Really?
We met on LinkedIn through a colleague or a
Dale.
friend.
Good old Dale.
Dale Dupree.
Yeah.
I don't know, 2 or 3 days ago.
So what's the deal here? Because Dale has introduced me and Xavier, but Dale also introduced me and John. So
weird.
I
You
feel
guys
that-
aren't strangers.
No. I
Oh,
feel
fun.
that John, that we should have had Dale here sitting in the middle or
Right
something
in
on
the
a
middle,
lazy
yeah.
Susan.
Yeah.
But So thanks, Dale, for putting us all together.
Yeah.
This is great.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I was actually under the impression you guys didn't know each other, but that's really cool. Orlando's just becoming smaller and smaller, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a small world after all.
It is.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love the room.
Sorry, I'll be here
Guys,
all.
full
all
No, I
the
love it.
time.
I love it.
Warning is
Happiest
that
place on
Tom
earth.
has the most creative sense of humor and will catch you off guard, and you have to be aware.
I wasn't expecting a
All
Disney
right,
reference
all
right
well,
now.
Okay, pressure's
That's
on.
awesome.
Pressure's on.
Okay. So Xavier, could you start us off on our first topic of discussion?
Yeah, so we were having some conversation earlier a little bit, and I would say probably a hot topic across all industries as a whole is security and data and privacy. And I know that both of you guys have some experience working specifically in those worlds, working with different companies to help solve that. And again, we had some thoughts. I did a little bit of research that I pulled out. I noted that there were a number of data hacks that obviously always happen, but in 2019, some of the larger ones that were made clear was like Capital One was hacked.
Yeah.
And it was something like 100 million users, which included not only credit card applications, so like Social Security, date of birth, but also banking information.
But I think a bigger one to really look at was Equifax, because Equifax, so Capital One, I had to go to Capital One to get a credit card, or I tried to apply for a credit card at Capital One. Equifax gets a lot of data from other parties. I went to a car dealership, and I don't necessarily know who they're processing my credit through.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you've ever tried to do anything credit-wise, or companies that are reporting your credit information out, like, maybe you got a loan from your local bank, they're reporting your credit information out to Equifax. You never actually directly dealt with Equifax in that question, where Capital One you directly dealt with. So I think from that point, the Equifax one scares me more than Capital One.
Even less control.
It's less control from the end user's point of view, from the normal consumer. I think Equifax should scare you more than Capital One, because a lot of times you didn't directly give your data to Equifax.
Yeah. Any
Or
thoughts there?
or even then, even scarier than that is what are the ones, as John just said, they're sharing this data. What about all the ones we don't know about? That's what really scares me in the dark web, knowing that our data can be gathered together and bundled, if you will, for a profile and sold on the dark web. You can buy an perfect 850 credit score, Social Security number, birth date, the whole 9 yards for $150 on the dark web. So
let's maybe not solicit that too much.
yeah. So.
You do have to, know how to get on the dark web, and there's more to it.
True.
But even then, but you mentioned Equifax. That's exactly why. Is because that information is out there, and so I think a good tip for your listeners is to to make sure that on the big three that you go out and you do that credit freeze.
Yeah.
Well, going off what you said, I agree. Like, I think that's a pretty scary point, and you make a good point. Like, you have to figure out you have to know how to get on the dark web. But those who can get on the dark web are the ones that we should be concerned about.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. They're the ones who know how to navigate that. And
well, and also I think you got to think about the collection of data too. So Equifax or Capital One, they have a lot of your data. Mm-hmm. But let's say this company A over here that you dealt with back 10 years ago, and then company B over here, and another company over here, another company here. Well, they're able to get your date of birth over here, and then over here they've got a social security number and date of birth, but over here they've got a former address where you lived, and then over here they've got something else. And then what's happening is all these other little companies are getting hit, and they're getting a piece of the data from here and a piece of data from here and a piece of data from here, and able to build it into one profile. And now you have a history of where you used to live. If any medical data was involved, maybe possible medical history as well. Sometimes, mother's maiden names, all those other things that are
all
supposed to be all those security questions that
I've answered
you can
those
do
100 times.
Yeah. So, sometimes it's not always from one area too. So you may go, well, I've never dealt with Capital One. It doesn't matter. But a lot of those things that are floating on the dark web, they're pieces of information that are then bridged together to try and figure out more about who you are.
Yeah. So before we continue, can we pause for a second for those that don't maybe have knowledge that are listening of the dark web? Can you give what is the dark web? What does that mean?
Well, to a layman, and Tom, you can jump in, but to a layman, I basically say it's an area like most people go to Google and they search what they want to know, and Google indexes the internet, right?
Yep. There's
other protocols out there besides what your standard web browser uses. You have things like Tor, IP2, things like that, where it's a little bit harder to get part of, or it's so like Tor was actually developed by the U.S. Navy, and then they released it publicly, and it was done for protection reasons of data the U.S. Navy wanted to transfer. But when they stopped kind of using it, other people started using it, and now it's kind of I don't want to call it a cesspool, but there's a lot of stuff going on that you can access through that you couldn't access through other ways. And so if you know how to get into some of those other systems, other protocols, besides just your normal web browsing that most people are used to, there's a whole areas of the internet out there that you wouldn't even know about.
Yeah. It's just like, we have Firefox, we have Google Chrome, we have Microsoft's Edge or Internet Explorer. There's a whole bunch of them. It's the same way. You're going to need a different tool to access that information.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But the point is that the people are out there bundling this data together for more targeted attacks. To date, it's always been you've got a UPS package, click here, or hey, FedEx package, click here, or something like that. But now, when you can bundle this information and find out, who your wife is, who Nana is, and so on and so forth, and you put all this data together, now we can contact Nana in an email, say that, oh, Tom's been locked up and he can't get out of jail unless you send us
manipulate a whole family or a whole group.
Unless you send us those 10 Apple gift cards from Best Buy, So that's that's the big danger, I think, is John was saying, that bundling of data together and using that for a more targeted attack towards people.
It's funny you mentioned the FedEx thing. My company does a really good job of sending out those phishing emails to test us.
Yeah.
The first couple of times I clicked on it, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah?
So I've had to get...
So you're that guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've had to get a little bit of coaching on what not to click on.
Yeah.
And well, Xavier, that's a perfect example for your listeners of a fantastic tool that's out there, is that phishing test.
Yeah.
Because you'll find out on that first pass that 27 to 37% of people are going to click on it, but once you tell the employees what just happened and you review that with the people who did click on it, you're going to find that the next pass is going to produce less than 10 people clicking on it. So that's why when we're talking about cybersecurity here in this topic, if your listeners can just make cybersecurity a topic within their organization, within whatever size business, or even within the home, talk about it with your family, talk about it with your team members, and that way you're really going to raise your level of awareness and make yourself a little bit more prepared.
Yeah, I'd like to add on. I mean, so for me professionally, I work mainly business to business, but I have 3 kids at home, Oldest one's 13, and we're having a lot of things with like, okay, do we want them to have Instagram? Do we not want them to have Instagram? TikTok, and everybody at school seems to have a TikTok.
Now we're getting to the parent advice.
Yeah, so it's kind of crazy, but I do think that the truth is, like, somehow one of my kids at one time before my wife locked it down, because she kind of handled some of that, was they bought a few iTunes things on one of the iPhones, and okay, it's not a big deal, $1 here for a game or whatever. It wasn't a big deal to us, but kids can be a big target. Kids are vulnerable, and I think there are a few nonprofits out there that focus on this, and I think some of the schools are trying to do it. But cybersecurity education for kids, because they're growing up into this. What they put on Instagram now will live with them for the rest of their lives in these profiles. And I mean, you can go back, and I mean, Facebook surprises me what I did 10 years ago, and you look at it and so you remember this memory from 10 years ago, and it's like, wow, that's what I did 10 years ago. So I think it's very important that people understand in the age that we're in, like, everything lives with you forever. And so I think kids, and then the older, the older population too, is kind of more vulnerable because they weren't around in a time like that. You couldn't go dig up a picture of somebody's house that they lived in 6 years ago. The truth is, all you need is an address, and you can look at any house in America through Google Street View.
So hold on, repeat what you said one more time.
All you need is an address.
No,
or
the
what?
first part.
Which first
Everything
part?
lives with you forever.
Everything
That's
lives with you
interesting.
forever on, in the dark. Not just in the dark web, in the web in general. Believe me, Facebook is never going to delete your pictures. If you go in there and delete them, yeah, maybe that's a little bit different. But whatever you uploaded is there, unless you like. What is that movie? There's that movie where the guy's like, it's in the cloud, and she's like, well, delete it. I was like, it's in, like, no one understands the cloud. What movie was that?
I know what you're talking about.
It was a trailer for a movie.
I think it was a meme or something.
Yeah, well, it became a meme. It became a meme, but that's kind of how it is. Once you press that upload button, there's systems out there that scrape social media pages and scrape other pages to get data out of it to put them into other systems. There's a lot of, from a B2B point of view, there's a lot of sales tools out there that are scraping LinkedIn and looking at profiles of LinkedIn and grabbing LinkedIn information, and same with Facebook and same with other things, so that it builds a profile for salespeople. That same technology could be used to build a profile for a criminal, or build a profile for anybody else for the most part. You just need the money to invest in it.
So what is it they say? Dance like nobody's watching, sing like nobody's listening, use social media like you're in the court of law.
Yeah.
It's
I love that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
People
Great.
don't, though.
No,
No,
not
they
at all.
don't.
Not at all.
No,
Yeah.
no.
They use it like it's a diary, which can be useful to a degree, but for the most part, very criminal.
Yeah, we could go on forever about that.
Yeah.
People saying,
Yeah.
hey, I'm out of town. Look at these pictures of me in
Perfect.
Greece.
We're going to
Hey,
get your
great.
house.
Let's get that home address.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got to tell a story about my wife. I was impressed with her because we went to Indiana around Christmas time, and she chose not to post anything to social media because she didn't want anybody to know we were gone. Because that's another thing. A lot of people
Sounds like a tech family.
Well, yeah, a lot of people post. Well, I didn't even make her do this or talk to her about it or anything. She just did it. But there are a lot of people that post up, "Hey, look at us in Paris." Well, you know what? People that can see your social media profile are maybe following you, maybe going, "Wow, this guy you went to high school with 15, 20 years ago, who's now been in jail 6 times, is going, hey, they're not in the country anymore, and I can go hit this place up." Like,
or the friend of a friend.
friend of a friend of a friend.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So one more point, and then we're going to move on from this topic. But one of the ideas was, you mentioned earlier that you felt that the Capital One was less of a concern in your mind than the Experian because you could control it. Now, to a certain degree.
Yeah, to a certain degree.
One of the other examples that I noticed was Quest Diagnostics this last year. And both of these came from CNBC. There was an article back in December, but it stated that Quest Diagnostics had 11.9 million customers' medical, personal, and financial information exposed. And it was through an agency, American Medical Collection Agency was the one that
It's a billing group,
billing
basically.
billing company that was responsible for that information, and it was exposed. So I guess the idea, if we're thinking, how can we be proactive?
So I'm going to go to the business side of things. I know we've been talking more, but the business side of things is, I think bigger businesses in the next year or two are going to start demanding more from their smaller partners. You also had the Target incident, 2-3 years ago? When was that? with the credit cards.
Correct.
Where that was
from the credit card processing
that was
company.
a contractor of a programmer of the credit card processing. You know, it was like 4 or 5 degrees away.
Correct.
From actual target itself. And you're going to start seeing, you already see it in government and some sides, especially with DoD and things like that. Local municipalities, maybe not so much, but you're going to start seeing in the private sector, everybody's going to be questioning or including in their contracts what it is that they're doing to meet cybersecurity. And honestly, us as America, we're a little behind because you have things like GDPR in Europe and a few other different things that have come out in other countries and other areas that really focus on this. What is going to be done with the information? How do you handle information? Why do you handle information in that way? And I think businesses really need to invest in, like the stuff we were talking about a minute ago about phishing email simulation and stuff. A lot of that really is not that expensive in the grand scheme of things. A lot of small businesses, if you're a local CPA firm with 5 employees, honestly, a few $100s, if that, is what it's going to cost you. What is that in the grand scheme of things to help train your employees, to help invest in your employees, to help keep that from happening from you? And I think a lot of smaller companies that are working for bigger companies on contracts, or they're doing services for bigger companies like the AMA and Quest, I think Quest is going to say from now on, moving forward, and a lot of bigger companies moving forward are going to say, look, we want to see your cybersecurity audits. We want to see you meet certain, criteria. There's a lot of standards out there. What's your
contingency plan?
What's your contingency plan? What compliances are you following? Can you prove to me you're following compliance? Because obviously, if you're dealing with medical data, you're dealing with HIPAA, but you also have the NIST framework. You have a lot of other things out there that you as a business owner should realize are out there and help get somebody to help you meet those standards and help you do that moving forward. I think it's very important in general, just all businesses across, I wouldn't just say America, but the world. I think it's hugely important.
Yeah.
So if we look at GDPR, you'll see that it's a fantastic idea. They're trying to mimic it in California now.
What does GDPR stand
that's
for?
That's the
General Data
Protection Regulation.
General Data Protection Regulation.
Yep. Yep. So what that does is it's saying that businesses should be held accountable for our data. Okay. But then if not, they'll be held to fines or sanctions. But the problem is that they're having in Europe is, well, how do we find this out? And well, what fines and what sanctions do we levy? Yeah. And so that's a whole issue in itself. Same thing with California. How do we enforce this is going to be another issue. So while we want these businesses to be proactive with our data, when we sign up to something or we as we type our credit card information in or scan it to the web, we want those people to be, we want to
morally
think that they're doing the right thing that we would do, but we can't count on it at all. As you know, John, because you'll ask a company, are you compliant? And there's so many companies out there that just
say yes. Well, yes, I think a big part of it too, you said morally. I don't think a lot of business owners, and especially in the medium and small business, I don't think a lot of business owners are doing it maliciously. I think it's just they truly don't know. It's
absolutely. Or they're getting bad advice from somebody.
That's another thing too, bad advice. I mean, there's a lot of bad advice out there on how to handle some of this stuff and how to do some of this stuff. So I don't think it's that, AMA was doing something purposely for that to happen. It's that they just didn't know to do certain things or weren't getting properly educated or didn't have the proper IT security people engaged to ensure something like that didn't happen.
So what you want your listeners to make sure is that it doesn't matter if it's just you or if it's your company or a big business, that you're monitoring the dark web for that information being out there, that you're looking for if it's just you're looking for your bundled information to be out there. If it's a company, you're looking for any email addresses or any information related to your domain.
Experian, since that happened, has been advertising. I see commercials now on TV a lot. We'll track your credit, but then they've added this whole component. They try to add it secondary, which is marketing. But we'll also make sure your information isn't on the dark web. We'll do a scan
which is
of
fantastic.
The dark web.
You can get that as cheap as $15 per head now per month for doing that. It's a fantastic service.
Yeah.
So it actually works.
It really does. Yeah. And what it is they scour the dark web and build a database of all the stuff that's out there, okay? And by they, I don't mean one company. This is a shared database, but we'll get to that in a little bit.
Foreshadowing.
But they will scan and create this database, and then when you pay these providers, they're going to scan that database and see what information's out there that you're looking for.
I will say this. So technology is a double-edged sword.
Yep.
It could be used for good or bad. So we've so far talked about criminals collecting data in that way and stuff like that. Don't think that the FBI and other people are doing the same thing to try and combat it.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like your cell phone. Your cell phone is a great piece of technology. You could use it for bad things or for good things. It's up to you. It's nothing more than a tool. So a lot of these things are tools, and there is good happening out there. Believe me, there's other people on the dark web that are good. There are areas of the dark web where maybe you're in Iran right now, or you're in somewhere else that you can't politically speak the way that you want to speak, or something like that. There are a lot of people out there that use the dark web for that type of thing, to transmit, what's happening in this area of the world or something. And so, like there is good out there, but all that stuff of data collection and stuff like that, there are companies that are trying to do it for good reasons, to let you know that, hey, your company's information or your personal information, I mean, in our cases, we're both really dealing with B2B stuff. So, hey, we've seen where these employees' information tied to your company is online here, here, and here. You may want to do something about that.
So thank you for pointing that out, to the positive aspect. We are going to move on to the next topic. Let Shelby introduce that topic.
Actually, I was going to say you do it. I was actually going to ask you a question,
Sure.
though, before we moved on. I was just trying to let you have your moment to talk about that, because that was really good. What, as a person in that cybersecurity, what would be your top 3 suggestions for people to stay secure on the web?
Good question.
I would definitely go through, and actually I think Tom could add a lot of this too. On the personal side, go through and make sure that your social media profiles are locked down to the best that they can be. Make sure you're sharing things responsibly. I think that's a big deal, because social engineering is a big part of some of this. I think also just ensuring that you're educated. Use different passwords everywhere. Don't use the same password everywhere. Use different passwords everywhere. Make it somewhat complex. I think on the business side, though, there's a little bit more to it, because usually you're dealing a lot more with other people's information. Make sure you just are engaged with people that can advise you correctly and that are educated on this correctly, because there is bad information out there. There's there's stuff that I did 3-4 years ago that's really no longer relevant. There's so much change in this that if you're not keeping up on a daily basis about new threats coming out, new versions of ransomware, what protects you against that it literally is a full-time job just keeping track of some of that. And your general IT person isn't necessarily the best person to do that. It's kind of like, I kind of explain IT like doctors. You go to the ER, you're going to see a doctor, they're going to help diagnose, like, okay, do you have a problem with your chest or your foot or your eye? You're not going to see a cardiologist for a problem for your foot. It's just the way it is. And so there's a lot of different segments of IT, and there's a lot of different people that are specialized in different areas. So make sure you're dealing with the right specialties for what you need for your company, or at least you're dealing with somebody who's helping identify getting the right knowledge basis in there, because you want to make sure you're seeing the right doctor for the problems you're having.
Fair enough.
So I'm going to steal 2 from John just because I'm a cheater like that. But but you're right, John, in the fact of passwords. And I'm going to touch on a subject that I don't hear enough about. And that's the password list gets stolen all the time.
Oh, yeah.
And it's usually from internal sources. So let's just say I work for Yahoo. I'm really mad at my boss. I'm getting ready to quit. I've got access to databases. I'm going to take that Yahoo database of passwords and put that on the dark web as soon as they fire me, because that's a solid $5 to $10 grand right there for me. So they'll take that password. So that's why it's critical that people change those passwords annually at the very least. It's hard to get them to do it any more than that, but you got to do it because they're out there. They're on the dark web. Another thing is the monitoring, the dark web monitoring. If you can do that, or freeze your credit, stay proactive, as John was saying.
Yeah.
But lastly, and to again steal off John's point, is ask somebody more knowledgeable. We IT people, we will give away our information all day long because we would much rather help you beforehand than afterwards. We don't want to have to go in and do the cleanup of ransomware and so on and so forth. So lean on things like NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Lean on companies like SANS, the SANS Institute, that's SANS. Those and many, there's a whole bunch out there, but those right there, those are big organizations who are giving away posters, giving away ideas for emails, on how you can keep your team members more secure and how to keep your family secure at home. So those are some great resources.
I love that they keep agreeing. There's like so much confirmation here between the two of you, and this was totally unexpected, at least from my perspective.
What do you mean between the two of us working the
Well,
same
it's
industry?
like I always go into this with the expectation that you guys don't know each other,
Yeah.
and then also that like you guys are going to be from very different sectors, but you guys are both on very similar pages, and that makes all our viewers actually feel more confident in what you're saying too, because you guys agree with each other.
Well, again, okay, so John and I have met once. I think we talked for about 10 minutes.
I would
once
say
or twice.
2 or 3 times
There
if you
we
want to
go.
count passing by. We've been to
Yeah.
like a LinkedIn local event, a few things like that, but we haven't actually worked together. or
Okay.
anything.
But
Gotcha.
the thing is that you're absolutely right. We are both in this for the same end game of that's helping everybody to be more knowledgeable.
Were you at
and
the
more
LinkedIn
secure.
local event that they hosted in?
College Park
No,
or the one downtown.
that's where you and I met.
Yep.
I don't remember honestly. I've been to
That's
quite
Too
a
many
few
networking
events.
events.
Correct.
LinkedIn
Yep.
local
Yep.
event.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we saw each other over there off Princeton at one over there. But yeah. And again, thanks, Dale.
Yeah.
So, but no, we're all in this for the same
Yeah.
thing, and that's just to help people be a little bit better at staying secure and keeping
And
their
I would
data
say from the
secure.
same thing, like one of our major vendors is forming a nonprofit that is crossing multiple vendors to ensure that data is being published out there. The Department of Homeland Defense and the FBI is publishing data out there daily for free. Now, the stuff they're publishing is a little bit more technical. You got to be able to interpret it. But the SANS Institute, I believe they're a nonprofit, aren't they?
Correct.
Yeah, they're a
Yeah.
nonprofit. So, like, people are trying to help you. You just have to make sure you're seeking the help. And
You're actually pursuing it and not just
you're
talking.
actually
Yeah,
pursuing
don't wait
it.
till they call you, because that's
Believe
not
me, the
that's not a
FBI
legit
and
call.
Department of Homeland
Yeah.
Security are pushing this stuff out like crazy because the cleanup, the type of investigations they have to do, they usually can't find out whoever did it.
Mhm.
It's easier to protect yourself up front than try and recover from it.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And we'll hold on to that point that you just made because I think there's some ways that we're going to reference it. So a little foreshadowing. All right. So topic 2. This is a more challenging one. And so we're going to maybe scale it back a little bit. But the idea was cognitive cloud computing, or I think as instructed, maybe just breaking it down to cloud computing, or just what is the cloud in general. But before we go there, I did a little bit of research. The goal of cognitive computing is to simulate human thought process in a computerized model using self-learning algorithms that use data mining, pattern recognition, natural language processing, and then basically the computer can mimic the way the brain works. So I would say probably the biggest one was what's that one that IBM created?
Watson.
Big Blue.
Watson. Yeah, IBM Watson is probably the most famous or the most popular use of this. But I guess before we go there, let's maybe uncover the idea of what is the cloud, how does the cloud work, what is that thing the cloud, like, just go
It
there.
does, yeah.
It's a mystery. It's a big mystery, isn't it, John?
It is.
It's in the sky.
It is. I mean, we talked about this a little bit, but I mean, to me, the cloud was created in the 1960s and 70s when you had a green screen terminal, and then down the hallway was a mainframe the size of a high school gym. There was a lot of companies that did things like that. Everything was centrally processed, essentially stored, what little storage there was. And that's kind of how things were. And then you kind of, over time, went to where things were more done on your PC personally, and then kind of went back to this whole cloud computing thing. Really what the cloud is today is really it's somebody else's server to begin with. But what is the cloud? I mean, you could be hosting a website on GoDaddy or Bluehost, and that could be considered cloud hosted. You could be using some type of SaaS product like Salesforce or Office 365 or G Suite. You could be doing some type of infrastructure thing where you actually have a whole server being hosted for you, and you can do some platform things. Some of your cognitive stuff is more of a platform thing. And instead of using IBM, I would use like more Amazon Alexa.
Okay.
Let's say you want to build an Alexa skill or something of that nature. Well, you have Alexa as your natural learning process, or your language processor, I'm sorry. And then you pass it through the different things that you want to be done based on the input that's given to Alexa. if you took the natural language processing out of it, though, really Alexa is providing is keyboard inputs, is providing words. What's
voice?
Is voice. It's providing voice as an input.
Inputs.
You could also type yes in a keyboard, and that could be an input. But you're going through all these processes. I think the reason why cognitive cloud, or why you probably caught on to that, is how would you do that internally to yourself? Unless you're IBM and run multiple data centers internationally, or Amazon or Google, how would you do that as your own company? How would you build another Alexa? How would you build all the computer processing power needed to do? And I'm just going to take cloud compute in general, like weather prediction and things like that. And the truth is, you really don't. The reason why you have the cloud the way it is today is a lot of people leverage someone like Amazon or Microsoft or Google for their cloud computing power so that they can run big data operations like that without having to tax, or without having to invest in it on their own, without having to have the personnel to run it, without having to buy the hardware, without having to buy the licensing, and so on.
Human capital, saving human capital.
Well, not just human capital, licensing, and other things too. There's other things there. Stress is one of them from inside the IT realm. You know, when you're dealing with higher level data center stuff and you've got to replace hard drives quickly, or you've got to do data migrations, you've got some type of application that's to run all the time. It can be stressful from our side of things. Yeah. But I think talking about the cloud and what is the cloud, I mean, there's so much to it. You have edge computing, you have hybrid cloud, public cloud, private cloud. I mean, the list goes on. So, I mean, I feel like you probably have a little bit of good knowledge on probably describing to different types of segments that use the cloud. I mean, just because your client base and everything.
Yep. Well, you're right in that it's so varied, more so than the amount of shrimp that the Bubblegum Shrimp Company, will go down through.
Mm-hmm.
But
is that place still in business?
Yeah. In fact, we'll have to head there this evening. But but no,
hey, Forrest Gump's still very popular. Okay.
Okay. Absolutely.
Yeah, that was
So-
Mississippi.
So, but my take on what is the cloud is this. Although we've all known about the cloud since, Earthlink and the days of AOL, when it really hit big, when people were, putting their email out there. And that was the first real big use of push of it in my mind. But a great way to look at it, as John was alluding to, with the stress that comes along with managing these services. So let's say we had an email service here in this room for the four of us. Well, John and I have got to take turns watching that box to make sure that it's secure and that it's updated and that,
and just running, just powered on.
Yeah, powered on. Yeah, that the hard drives aren't going bad. That's a 24-hour, 7-day a week, 365-day a year job. So you can imagine what John and I are going to charge you for the two of us to make sure that we're here all that time. Whereas the cloud, everybody, the four of us here, everybody in this building and everybody up and down the street is going to use those services, and now we're dividing John and my's time rather than just the four of us. We're dividing it with everybody in the community.
But let's give a real world example. So 4 of us here to run an Exchange server would be thousands of dollars of upfront cost and also of man hours just going forward.
Which email is an Exchange service?
Exchange is an email, yeah. Sorry. So Microsoft Exchange is one of the main primary, just throughout time, email services for businesses. With Office 365,
Outlook.
Well, Outlook is part of Outlook, ties into Exchange. Exchange is the server side of Outlook. So with Office 365, we're talking probably about $5 to $15 a person, depending on what features we want, because there's a lot more besides just email built into it. Now you got SharePoint and Planner and whiteboarding and Teams and all these other things, right? So, it could be $20 a month for all 4 of us to have that email running through Microsoft servers without, where the other way of doing it for us would be just ridiculous.
Well, that would entail us buying the server, okay?
The licensing.
Making sure that we had the adequate internet service protection, making sure that we've got hardware warranties, making sure we've got security on it. Just on and on and on and on. We could sit here for the next 20 minutes talking about the things we have to do to ensure that the things we're installing are done right. Whereas by choosing a service that's out there, we're all absorbing those costs. Yeah. So that's a great way to look at it.
Let me see if I can break this down.
Please do.
Some
to simplify terms.
To simplify.
Yep.
So my understanding of cloud is that, as you're saying, rather than having to have that as you said, gym full of a bunch of different servers and all independent businesses and individuals having to actually manage that equipment, manage a server, make sure all those different things you say are operating. There are these systems in place where we can essentially use those services from someone else and share responsibilities, which therefore decreases costs.
Here's a really easy way to put it. You could buy a house. You could buy an apartment complex. You could lease some space. You could even sublet that space in some cases. So think of the cloud as a big apartment complex that's just leasing out a bunch of things. That's really what it is. Now, you could look at that and say, okay, a warehouse that's subletting different types of storage versus an apartment complex versus whatever. Those are kind of like your different types of clouds, your SaaS providers, your infrastructure providers, or so on. But that's really what it is. It's more of a financial model. And a lot of times the cloud still has to be managed. A lot of mistakes people make about the cloud is they, do fire a lot of people like us and they move it to the cloud and they think everything's good. There are some aspects of the cloud, depending on what you're doing on the cloud and how you're doing it and whose cloud you're using, that still have to be maintained, that still have to be, some type of company presence, handled. Like an example is, so we get an email server and one of us gets fired. We got to cancel out that email and then we hire somebody else. You got to put somebody else in that email server, right? Those types of things still have to happen even though it's in the cloud. How is Microsoft going to know you hired or fired somebody? They're not. You still have to do that type of program and what that person can do within the cloud. Just because your data is in the cloud, do you want your janitor accessing your financials? Janitors probably no. So you still have to build out some of that stuff as well. Some rules and so on.
So I'm a huge fan of the cloud in that way that we share it all out. And my example is SolarWinds. I think now 4 years ago, it cost about $10,000 to $15,000. SolarWinds is a product, this particular one, that you would install an appliance within your infrastructure, and it would monitor everything from the firewall to the switches to all the workstations, and it correlates the data to find out if there's some nefarious character in your internet. Okay, so this was a huge undertaking.
He likes big words,
but yeah, that was a good word.
It's for the podcast. It's fun, right? But no. I can think a lot of other words to call these people. Yeah. Nefarious is about the kindest word I could think of.
Okay,
but so rather than spending $10,000 to $15,000 up front, and then you've got ongoing support costs annually. Now SolarWinds offers a cloud version of the same thing, which is about $120 a month. So as you can imagine, spending $1,200 a year up front, as opposed to that $10,000 to $15,000 investment, it's no longer reserved for the larger companies. Now the mom and pops of the world can be just as secure as Universal Studios or Disney.
I will say this though: there's so much out there about the cloud. Like I said, we said SaaS products, software as a service, and I talk about hybrid cloud and public cloud and so on. Is you got to be making sure you're utilizing it right. Not one cloud provider, not one application provider is a one size fits all.
Yep.
You got to use a lot, and there's a lot. And what I'm dealing with now is a lot of cross cloud type stuff. So I know people that are backing up their Office 365 environments to systems that run on Amazon, because if something were to happen in an Azure data center, well, Office 365 runs out of Azure's data centers. It's a Microsoft product. So how do I still access that data if there is something wrong with that? So you have a lot of
Azure.
Oh no! Oh no! They're quite the opposite.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, quite the opposite. Microsoft is doubling down, tripling down on Azure right now. I mean, to the point.
Our company's just making some changes.
Maybe I want to say to the point that Microsoft is experimenting with like data centers underwater in Ireland and all sorts of things. Like they are doubling, tripling down on this stuff.
Interesting. Yep. So one, I want to kind of take this. So I threw out that topic of cognitive cloud computing, and then we kind of took a step back from that and broke it down into little pieces, if you will. So going along the lines of the IBM Watson or the Alexa, essentially what that's done is it's taken this infrastructure where data is stored and then added another layer to it where it's now the computer itself is interpreting all that data so that it can spit out more finite data points for.
So I'm going to give you a term. It's called platform as a service.
Excuse me.
So and I'm going to explain that for a second. So you may have a server 2016, server 29, Microsoft server, or a Linux server that you completely manage and run, and you've got to put some type of program on it. You install it, like you said, Outlook or QuickBooks or something. I'm going to install QuickBooks when I'm going to use that application, right? So now, like what Alexa and basically what IBM Watson is a platform that has it all put together. You don't have to do any coding with it, really. I mean, you do have to do some configuration and stuff of that nature, but you didn't have to develop it. You didn't have to maintain it. You don't have to do a lot of that stuff. They're doing it for you and making it really easy for you to consume it because they're providing you with a whole platform. And that platform includes the servers and all the other stuff we talked about, along with their application system sitting on top or their library sitting on top. And Amazon is similar with like Alexa and stuff like that. Alexa, you can plug into Alexa. They offer it as a platform. You can program to it. You can program with it. In order to do things with voice commands and stuff, and they offer it as a platform. You couldn't like take IBM Watson and install it on your own server over here. You couldn't take Alexa and install it on your own set of servers over here. It's just the way it is,
So 2 questions. I'm going to throw them both out, and then you can kind of piece them together how you may. When I was doing research, there were 2 examples. So that's kind of going back to your foreshadowing and kind of going back to what you said at the beginning, where there's both good and bad uses for this information. Mm-hmm. So one of the things is, how many times have you been on your phone and talked about, wanting ice cream, and then all of a sudden, an hour later, all kinds of advertisements of ice cream are popping up?
My most recent one was I joked to somebody, well, if I do that, you're going to have to bond me out of jail. And the next day, my Facebook feed was filled with bondsman advertisements. And at first I thought, what did I do? And I thought, oh my gosh, that comment came back. And it goes on. It goes on to ladies talking about various things. What was it, liposuction or collagen? One of the two. I had some friends that were talking about that. A girl who was at the table, did not take place in the conversation, has never looked up any of this, started having these items in her feed the next day. So so where are they coming from? All over. And who are they being shared with? We don't know. And that's a scary part.
I think that comes into more privacy than security. So obviously a theory of your phone's always listening, or Alexa or Google Home is always listening to you. It's kind of true. It's what they do with what's being listened to, right? Everything, like if you have something set for OK Google or Hey Alexa, like it has to be listening in order to hear those commands. So whatever else it's getting, we're kind of leaving it on those companies to do what they feel is right about it, and just kind of assume that they're handling it accordingly. And I think people are kind of realizing that, hey, some of these companies or some of these systems are taking a lot of that excess data and doing things with it. And I think, because let's face it, Facebook is not like some dark web obscure. It's not some cyber criminal out there trading information for Bitcoin.
Depending on who you talk to.
Well,
I was gonna say, yeah.
But it's a large and publicly traded enterprise, has to meet SEC regulations. There's a lot to it. It's not like some fly by night crazy scam artist somewhere, even though some of their stuff could be broken down politically to stuff, but let's face it, it's a large company, publicly traded company, employs lots of people, like it's got a lot going on. I think we need to talk to these companies and try and get them to hold themselves more accountable on what they're doing with our data.
So one last point, and then like to move on. Another thing that I found was going back to the Boston Marathon bombing. So apparently, the way that they were able to discover, they being the investigators, FBI, local police, whatever that were involved in that investigation, the way that apparently they were able to discover who in fact committed the crime, who did the bombing, was it was reported that within 24 hours of the detonation, they had pulled over 480,000 discrete images and videos of the entire site. And that was used through a cognitive cloud computing type of technology. And then ultimately they were able to use their data centers along with this computer system to then analyze that data and then ultimately, determine who committed the crime. And that was reported by, I can't even pronounce the guy's name, but some site, government technology.
Here's probably what they didn't tell you. If you drive through, even if it's not a red light camera, but as you drive through like every intersection here in Orlando, you'll see cameras.
Yep.
There's cameras at different exits getting on and off of different interstates and the turnpike and stuff. A lot of those images actually didn't come from like social media. A lot of those came. Now, not to say that they didn't go through social media trying to scrape things, but a lot of those came from like security systems that were nearby where they went and said, hey, you have a security system and you're a block away from the bombing. We would like to have that data, and the company turned it over. I mean, think about it. When you drive into Walmart, if you look, there's all these security cameras pointing yeah. So they went to companies, and they also went to the municipality of Boston and got a lot of the cameras that are there from the DOT, from different other departments, from the companies that are around. That's probably where most of those images came from.
How likely was it that they may have pulled from like mobile devices?
They wouldn't have pulled directly from a mobile device.
No,
I don't.
That's so
think
very
so.
unlikely.
Is it physically possible? Yes, with the right malware and things like that. Is it physically possible to listen in on a cell phone? Is it physically possible to take an image from a cell phone? Yes. So illegal, it's not even funny, but yes, it's possible.
But if they had gone around,
or unless you're the people who make the laws,
unless you're the people that make the I mean, there's a lot of unknowns about things like the NSA and people high level like that, and there is a lot of DoD large level investment at like high level top secret investment at stuff like that. It's true.
That would have been your Navy days.
It's true. Well, I wasn't really. I wasn't ever in the Navy, but it's true. But as for being able to pull from people's cell phones and stuff, like legally, no. You technically would need a search warrant. Technically, from a legal point of view, you start to cross a lot of lines there.
Well, you were talking about that, and we were talking about the foreshadowing beforehand. My take on it is that computers can now think faster than humans. They can translate from one language to another faster than humans. They can read faster than us now. Mm-hmm. So they're compiling all this data together, like you said. And it's similar to what I was talking about earlier with the dark web, how they build these databases of things. That's what AI is really doing. And they're providing this software as a service, companies are, that they have this huge amount of intelligence. And now anybody, the smaller companies, can use tie-ins to tie into that database so they can provide that to their clients. So we're going to see a lot more of this AI on a lot more websites. When you get that little chat bot that pops up, hey, welcome to our website. What do you want to know? And you type in your question. It gives you an answer. That's a perfect example of that AI at work. There's not somebody on the other side.
There's always a really nice name for that chat box.
That's right. Yeah.
Really
but
personify it.
Exactly. But we're going to see that kind of cap off soon. It's going to hit a level to where it's gotten all the information it can until we get to quantum computing. And once we get to that, then that's when we're really going to see the next big leap in how fast it can
time travel. Then
well, that's next. We're waiting on Doc Brown for that one.
So as far as quantum computing, though, what do you guys predict, and like when we might see that come to fruition?
Google's saying they already have it, and they're just trying to fine tune it before they release it. I don't know. There's been.
Do you think we're ready for that? I
think as a society, no. No, I think there are sectors that are. I think the government, like DoD, would eat it up. I think certain companies like Facebook and stuff like that are already invested in certain areas would eat it up. But when you say society as a whole, we're talking about my grandma, my mom, talking about kids, talking about all these other things. I don't think 75% of the people can conceptualize like what could be done now, let alone when you add quantum computing to it.
So politically, it would have a huge impact, but for the normal everyday person, no.
Well, the problem is the impact would be happening to the normal everyday person, but they wouldn't be understanding the impact, that like why, how it's impacting them.
Right, and
we have chat bots. Most people think that's somebody sitting on the other line waiting for you to type in your question. Yeah, but no, that's actually a computer waiting and to spit out that answer, and it's gotten faster and faster.
It's just named
Allie. Exactly. We're getting closer. Wow, there you go. I like that. We're closer than you could think. It's coming very soon, I think.
So theoretically, with quantum computing, from my understanding of it, is the amount of processing that could happen at a given second would be like just astronomical, way beyond astronomical. So literally, at that point in time, I think you could start to see where you could actually have a full function of a human brain to some extent built on a computer. It would take a few years to get there. It would take a lot of programming, a lot of effort, a lot of learning things. But I think if quantum computing were to come out and the right algorithms were built and things were fine-tuned, within a few years, you probably would have something that is, almost like a Skynet type thing, or something where it's conceptualizing so much that it's like almost like a group of humans thinking together that it's kind of scary.
So let's blend this into the last point. The last point is robotic process automation. In other words, just automation in general.
Yeah.
But same idea along with the cognitive computing. So I did a little bit of research of examples within the finance industry of companies that have really adopted that mindset or used some automation systems and were awarded. One was this company called Chiron Systems. They're a claims payment processing company that used these automation systems to compile data, which could significantly reduce the claims payment processing time.
Okay.
Another example was Bank Colombia. It's an investment portfolio management company, one of the largest in Colombia. Used this information to create a tool, an InvestBot, that they called it, to help their customers over a certain account balance be able to get real-time data for how they could manage their accounts, receive market information, things like that. So how do you think the businesses that you're talking to, or the everyday listener, how are we interacting with this, or how could businesses benefit from those sort of systems?
I think it's there. I think any business should be taking advantage of, even basic businesses, like a doctor's office would check in a patient or something like that, could speed up and cause a lot less friction by implementing some of these things. And some of the automation stuff is there pretty easily. Like we talked about Office 365 earlier. I'm a Microsoft partner. I deal with this a lot, but you have forms and flows in there where you could have somebody fill out a form and it fires off a flow that says, if this was checked, do this, if this was done, do this, and then email this party and wait for this approval and through a thing. You can already kind of build that out. Now, I think what you got to do, though, as a company is, this is a term that's been thrown around a little bit, and I hate terms like the cloud. I honestly hate that term. I didn't say that earlier, but
Automation.
But no, the cloud is nothing more than a marketing term,
Okay.
But robotic automation, whoever put robotic in front of it, let's face it, automation. We've been trying to do that for years, even before computers. How do we make things quicker, better, more efficient, right? So, I feel that companies should be taking steps to make those investments. And a lot of them have some of the tools already to start slowly doing it. But I think what they really need or what's missing is IT guys like us are trying to do it for companies. Is you're going to hear the term citizen developer a little bit more. And I think that's where you get people that are in the company that are doing these things, and they have an idea, and you give them tools to try and do that for themselves to some extent. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
are you familiar with that term? Have you ever heard that lately or anything?
That's why I'm making a note.
Okay. I was asking more time here.
Yeah. So my take is this: is that you're talking about how companies should be utilizing this. We talked about the chat bots. You think about the times that you call now and you get an automated voice on the other end of the system. Can I help you find something? Tell me your account number or enter it in. All that. Well, we've replaced somebody. That's an automated process there. So that's replaced somebody, and it's
when you start
fantastic.
yelling and you say representative like 40
or
times
hit
over and over.
zero.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
0.
Yeah,
Come on.
it's not a good form of
Yeah.
automation.
Yeah,
It's not an
yeah.
intuitive
Well,
form of
some
automation.
are becoming better.
Yeah,
but-
and again, it depends on who they're tying
Mhm.
into. What
Yeah.
databases are they tying into? So that's really interesting. And that's something that should be considered. When talking about this, how companies could use it, because the services are becoming much cheaper. But the one thing that I'd like to add is, you've got to have, for business continuity purposes, what happens when that system goes
Yes.
down? What happens when there's an update and your tie-in to that database online goes away? What's your company going to do then? How are you going to work? Do you have to wait until that process comes back online? So when you roll out these solutions, you've got to think about worst case scenario and make sure that you plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Absolutely. Pre-mortem development.
Yeah.
So we've got to wrap up here.
All right.
Oh man. Okay.
Yeah, hold that thought. Hold that thought. To wrap up, today's podcast, we've talked about a number of different points today, some that are valuable to the consumer, some that are more valuable to the business, some just common knowledge, even talked about some, sort of topics. I want for a second, and maybe you were going here, maybe you weren't. What's maybe one major trend that you recognize that maybe we haven't talked about that you see, either the industry going or, some value add to your consumers, your customers?
I'll be happy to jump in on this one.
Go
So
ahead.
we've talked about software as a service. We've talked about platforms as a service. The one that I think is the scariest trend that we saw at the beginning of 2019 and is just blowing up even more here in 2020 is ransomware as a service. And what this is prior to last year, you had to be very savvy to be able to create this ransomware, to be able to know how to disperse it, to be able to know how to negotiate and get the ransom, give them the key and their data back. It was a very technical process. Well, now they've created a service where Tom's ransomware can be bought for $350 online with any stolen credit card, of course.
So now somebody that just with a
some
devious enough
idiot
personality can just do it without having to have
Exactly.
knowledge.
And not only can they buy the software, that comes with support.
Guys,
to
please,
help.
nobody buy this software.
but the support that comes with it they'll help you set it up, determine who you should be sending it to, what the message should be to get them to click on it, how to negotiate that cost, and how to get the payment. And then you split the payment with this service. So all these idiots with all these stolen credit card numbers now have the ability to use the spray and pray approach of that FedEx or that UPS email and prey on us and hope to lock our data up. So my advice to everybody is just make sure that there's some backup solution out there. Not Microsoft Office 365, not G Suite. Those are just data repositories. You need a backup solution that will take that data to an off-connected location.
What are some examples of those?
Safe. Veeam is one. Let's see.
Unitrends, Zerto,
Datto.
Datto.
Datto is the one that I think is awesome. They've got it down to less than $40
so
a
business
month
owners,
now.
if your tech person is recommending one of these, then you're going in the right direction.
Absolutely. And if your tech person isn't, then you're setting yourself up for disaster, because I've seen where Microsoft Office data will be wiped out.
Yes.
Now, granted,
or encrypted. It can be encrypted with ransomware, very similar to a computer.
Now, I'll give Microsoft credit. They will work with you to get that back.
They try.
It will take a week or two. So can your business run a week or two with no data?
Well, and also Microsoft has this lovely little term in their terms of service.
Oh,
you know those things that you scroll through all the time and you just hit yes or next. They have this lovely little thing in their terms of service called 6B, Section 6, whatever, point B, whatever you call it. Where they specifically say that they recommend a third-party backup tool.
So in my experience was when I was on the phone with them, what they told me was, sorry, Tom, we don't guarantee that we will back up that data.
We don't guarantee the granularity of the data.
Yeah, John, they guarantee they'll back up their data. No, Tom, we're saying we can't guarantee that we'll get it back. They guarantee they'll get it back. Because you know that it's there, but no, they will tell you, quite frankly, that they don't. So that's the biggest trend I see. John?
Yeah.
Well, before you answer, I've got a question for you, John.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was helpful. We talked about this, and I think we all have these areas in our industries where we get frustrated at who our customers or consumers are. They're just not getting it. What is one of the biggest areas of miseducation that you recognize with maybe your clients or just the average listener?
You know, I would really say there's two. The importance of backup and disaster recovery, which here in Florida we're a little bit higher on the scale because we get tested every few years with a big hurricane. But you get out of Florida, you get into other areas, and it's worse. But a true backup system and disaster recovery. Backup system is different than disaster recovery, and that disaster recovery is like policy and procedures around it, how you're going to do things about it. What are you going to do if you can't connect to the server? What are you going to do if your email is down? What are you going to do if this, if that? And, fire, flood, natural disaster, there's a lot of things that you should include in that. And it should be a kind of a corporate thing for you to be looking at. And I think also the cybersecurity side of things, a lot of people, let's face it, we talked about Target, Equifax, Capital One.
Massive companies.
Yeah, every customer that I deal with doesn't have a budget the size of what their IT budget was, right? I think, I forgot what it was with Target, but it was like $1 billion budget. I remember the Lewis Lerner email IRS thing. They had a $2 billion a year budget for IT.
Wow.
$2 billion. However, you know, you need to invest somewhat in it. You don't want to be the lowest hanging fruit on the tree. You know, if you're a 5-person CPA firm, make sure that you're stronger than the other 5 people CPA firms around you. Put a little bit into it at a time. Slowly make changes. Slowly implement new things. But continue to do it. Cybersecurity and like HIPAA compliancy. We talked a little bit about compliancy and NIST. It's not like a once and done thing. You've got to be continually auditing, continually improving, continually figuring out where your gaps are, what's changed, how things have changed, and then implementing. Sometimes it's processes, policies, and procedures. I work so much with HR now. In a lot of companies, it's not even funny because a lot of it is human caused or sometimes not malicious. Sometimes it's just a policy and procedure process that needs to be put into place. And sometimes it's pure technology.
So we're short on time, but last point or area for you guys you can both offer. So we're making a lot of recommendations for what might be potentially your customers, different businesses, whatever. But you know, oftentimes we hear something and we say, oh, you know, that's for everybody else, not us. So for the you know, mom and pop CPA shop that you just said, or you know, whatever those businesses are, what is a business that's too small and what's a business that...
Okay, you're never too small. In fact, the smaller you are, the more important it is. Because if you're that 5-person CPA firm, that's your livelihood. That's your everything. And if you get hit hard and you lose all your data or it gets stolen or worse, sold, you will be out of business. You will not be able to withstand the lawsuits and the fines and the things like that will come, especially in the HIPAA side of things. Or in some other regulated industries, which CPAs, there are some regulations to it, but not as stringent as like some of the other compliancies out there. Yeah, medical and stuff. But, you know, let's face it. Man, do you know final numbers on what some of those bigger, like the Capital One or Equifax breach was?
As far as cost?
As far for cost, for cleanup and everything, not just initial, but everything, incident response and everything.
More than I could ever think.
Yeah, I mean, it's billion. I mean, they're probably up to billions of dollars, right?
Yep.
Between, you know, employee overtime, between just everything, and then you've got things like consumer confidence that have lost. You know, there's probably people right now going, well, I'm looking for a new credit card. Maybe I should go with Chase instead of Capital One because obviously something's up with Capital One.
There's definitely a consumer ripple effect for
there's
quite
a consumer marketing effect, but here's the difference. Capital One, Equifax, they all have big enough budgets. They all have the right insurances. They all have a lot of things that they can withstand that hit. If you're smaller, if you're a small to medium-sized business, you probably don't. Can you?
Yeah, you know.
Let's face it. Equifax, Capital One, they've probably got a building this size, you know, bigger than my house, just full of attorneys.
Yep.
You know, do you have that? The answer is probably no.
And it's not just the 5-person business that has to worry. Just before this last Christmas, a company with 300 employees was forced to fire everyone. Yes. Because there was a data breach, because they lost their data. They paid to get the data back. The keys that they were given didn't work. So right before Christmas, the owner said, I'm very sorry, but we have no way to invoice our clients because we don't know what they owe. We have no way to collect money. So they had to let all 300 employees go. It's just horrible. So my recommendation is to keep what happened to that company from happening to you, and it doesn't matter how big your company is. The biggest problem in organizations is us, the human, okay? So by implementing what's called two-factor authentication, where you use this in addition to what's up here, you've got two things to get into an account. That will decrease the chances of an account breach by 99.9%. So if you can decrease your possibility of your account being breached by that much, then you're putting yourself that much safer. So
it's like Lysol.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, 99.9. Absolutely.
That's the name of the episode. It's like
I'm
Lysol.
still working on your Alley reference, trying to remember the name of that show, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But no, That's my take. If I could offer up one piece of advice, it's implement that for all of your online accounts wherever possible.
Yes.
So we will include for all the listeners the contact information for both of our guests today. So feel free to check them out. Obviously, if your business needs some sort of guidance or if you just have questions, they both volunteered to give information.
Absolutely, give it away whenever we can, because like we say, we'd rather help you beforehand. We'd rather talk about it for free and help you stay safe than you get a call and can you drop what you're doing and come here, because if you don't, we're going to shut down. That's a bad call to get. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's a lot to know that someone's whole business or the whole operations is riding on your decisions. I mean, I've been in situations like that, and Tom definitely has too, where that your decision right now is going to possibly change, a $3 or $4 million company for the rest of their possible short or long business. So,
change people's lives.
Yeah, change people's lives, and hopefully it's always for the positive.
Yep.
Sometimes it ends up being negative, though.
You guys are awesome. I appreciate both of you. Xavier and I are happy to have you guys on it. In fact, I would love to bring you guys on in a future episode and talk about more stuff.
Yeah.
Well, you guys are awesome for working to get the message out to your listeners.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they appreciate that.
Because, tech is a wide umbrella of things. And starting off with a good, positive piece of advice, I think, is a good way to go. Thank you so much for being on. Xavier, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, thank you guys for listening. Thank you for being on, and look forward to another episode of Tech and Flow.
This is Shelby Reynolds, your host.
Xavier Gray. I'll let you guys.
Bye.